One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. We are going to ruffle some feathers in today's episode, because we are going to talk about the things that really suck whenever you are having a fantastic interview and you have this great guest on your show and they don't share it. Why does this happen? I get this question all the time from so many frustrated podcasters. They're like, I had a fantastic interview, and I thought that the person is going to share it everywhere, and it's crickets. Like, I follow them on social media and they didn't even re-tag themselves, or they didn't even tag me, or, blah, blah, blah. Like, the list goes on and on and on of what happens when your episode doesn't get shared. And I get it. I get the frustration. But today I want to flip everything on its head. I feel like this has been a theme lately. We're just kind of flipping things and flip the script. And sometimes we're just burning the whole thing down and rebuilding, because what I want you to do as a host of a show is get really good at being an advocate for other people's content. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to promote your podcast guest appearances so you can attract the type of people that will do the same thing. We are going to be model podcast guests today, and we're really going to think about all the different strategies that I implement whenever I'm a guest on someone else's show, because it helps to really draw in those type of people that I can interview that will do the same thing. So call it good karma, call it, being the model, like do what I say, not as I do. No, that's not right. That's parenting or something, right? Like that's a different thing. We're not even going to go down that rabbit hole today. We are talking about, I want to walk the walk and talk the talk today. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? So as you can imagine, when you think about promoting your podcast guest appearances, there are three very distinctive categories or phases of this process that we need to think about. So there is the before or the recording phase of your podcast guest appearance. Then there's what you do before the episode actually goes out. Like you're in this holding pattern of, I don't know exactly when it's going to go live, but there's a few things to do there. And then when your guest appearance actually goes live. So when you're recording is number one, before the episode goes live. So you've already recorded, but it hasn't gone live. And then number three is when your guest appearance goes live. So I've said this a few times here on the podcast and just kind of publicly. If you follow me on social media or you watch my YouTube videos, guesting on podcast has been a huge priority for me in 2022. And it's really shown up. And I guess, if you're a manifestation person, then it's something that has really come into just play. These goals are happening because I'm hyper focused on getting on other people's shows this year. I've already been a guest on close to, and my big goal, okay, here, I'm just going to dish it out for you. My big goal was to get on 25 podcasts in 2022, which if you look at it, if there's 52 weeks in a year, that's every other week getting on a podcast or being in someone's content. And as of right now, when I'm recording this, we're getting close to the end of quarter one, and I've already guested, I think, on 7. This is a pretty big deal. I've already done 7. So it's okay, I think I'm going to batch, a few more guest appearances and really make it. But y'all, just because I've guested on 7, most of those have not gone live. Even if I recorded a lot of them in January and February, they are still not live as of me recording this. So just know, if you are guesting on people's content, sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it's recording something and then it doesn't air for 2-3 months, sometimes 6 to 12 months, which just blows my mind that, everything changes so rapidly in the industry that I can't think of something that I could say today that is 100% still relevant in 12 months, unless it's just the principles of marketing and creating content. So that always makes me a little nervous when people tell me oh, it'll be 12 months before this episode goes live. I'm oh my gosh, that's a really long time. Okay, let's just keep everything evergreen. But today, I want to talk about what I do to promote my guest appearances whenever I go on someone else's show. So number one, we're going to talk about recording, kind of when you're in the holding pattern before it goes live, and then when an episode actually goes live. I try to treat my guest appearances just like my own content. It holds the same value to me because, one, I want to make sure that I am super, super valuable to the host, right? They have been so gracious to let me get in front of their audience and share their message. So I want to over deliver in value. I'm going to show up on time. These are some of the basic things. Y'all, I'm going to link to a YouTube video where I talked about this. We talked about the bare minimum requirements that someone should have whenever they are a guest in content, and showing up on time, speaking in complete sentences, and just being an overall good human being is some of the basic things that you have to do. I just said that wrong. I'm trying to work on my grammar, and I'm catching myself in real time. I'm trying to edit while I'm speaking, and it doesn't always work. But y'all, this is podcasting, okay? And this is my style. I know some people would say, oh, you said that wrong. You should stop, edit it out, and just totally start over. That's not how we do things around here. I will call out my mistakes and happily tell you, oh, this is actually did you hear that? I just messed up totally. But now we're rewinding, we're backtracking here, and we're starting over. That's like just a little tidbit for those of you that are perfectionists out there and you just cringed at me calling out my own mistakes. This is me giving you permission to not be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You can make mistakes, you can survive them, and you can keep going. Okay, so let's get back to the topic at hand because we're talking about when you are recording. So I'm going to take my guest appearance. I was recently on my good friend Heather Sager's podcast. She has the Heather Sager Show. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. But I actually talked about this in the YouTube video because when I did this YouTube video about being a guest in other people's podcast, like her episode had just aired that week. And so it was fresh on my mind. And I thought about, well, what we did when we were recording, and because I know her really well, this wasn't awkward, but it could be awkward if you don't know the host. But I recommend taking a selfie or taking a boomerang, doing something that you can use for marketing this episode in the future. So even if you just take a boomerang or take a selfie, like say, hey, I want to promote this on my social media, or I'm going to share this with my email list. Can I take a quick selfie? Or you can do a screen grab, whatever you're doing when you're recording, but do something that is in the moment where people can see, because there's a lot of people that don't use video. There's a lot of people that don't use video with their podcast, and that's totally fine. But I do like the idea of capturing something that's visual that you can say, hey, this episode is coming. So whether you share it that day, like if I were recording a podcast episode today and I said, hey, can we take a quick selfie? And then we did, and then I would share that on my Instagram stories and I would tag that person and say, we just had an incredible conversation. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Or that's me as a host is what I typically say. But if I were guesting on that podcast, I would say, oh my gosh, I cannot wait until so-and-so airs this podcast interview because it had great takeaways for this specific type of audience. So you're piquing people's interest well before the episode ever goes live, right? We're in the recording phase, but you're planting the seed that people will know down the road. Oh, well, she was a guest on this podcast. Maybe they would go look up that person on Instagram, or they would go check out their podcast. So it's this marketing tool of planting the seed early, getting people interested in what you're doing, who you're talking to, what y'all are talking about, because then they will say when your episode finally is live, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I remember when Crystal posted that selfie with Heather and they were talking about, they had a great conversation. I want to go listen to it. I want to go see what they said. And bonus brownie points if you actually take a clip while you're recording and say, hey, we talked about blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of work. I don't ever do that. I don't ever do videos with my guest while we're actually live, but I will take a quick selfie, do a boomerang, do a screen grab with them. And then whether I use it right then or later is totally up to my discretion and it's up to you as well. But I do like having that social proof right out of the gate that this recording happened. So that is all number one. Now, number two, this is when your episode has been recorded, but it hasn't gone live on that particular show. So I recently recorded an episode with Aubrey. She has the Freelancer to CEO podcast, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes. I highly recommend checking it out. But we didn't do any video for that one. So I couldn't take a screen grab or do anything like that. We were doing just audio only. But I'm telling you right now, this episode, when I'm recording this, has not gone live on her show, but I'm sitting here telling you about it. I could talk about how much I enjoyed the interview. I could do an Instagram live and I could tag her or an IG story and say, oh my gosh, this episode, it works a lot better if you know that your episode's going to go live sometime soon, whether it's that week or the day before or, sometime around when it's going to go live. But talk it up, get people excited. So when that content drops, they run to it and they go listen. Now, let me tell you before we get into when the episode actually goes live, what you're doing, and I said this in the beginning, You are doing things that you would want a guest on your show to do. You are modeling the behaviors that you're like, man, if somebody did all of these things, I would say, I want that person back on my show. I want to invite them again because let me tell you, it is so much fun when you can be a return guest on someone's podcast. So it's hard, y'all. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty hard to get a guest appearance on a show when you don't know the host, you don't have any kind of rapport created, like you are literally shooting in the dark, hoping that someone says yes. It's a little frustrating. But when you do get that yes, when you do start that networking process and building those relationships with other podcast hosts, for someone to say, I would love to have you back on the show, it is just like the ultimate amazing feeling because it's great whenever you record and they're like, oh, this is an awesome interview. Can't wait for it to go live. That's fantastic. But it's even better when you finish a conversation and somebody is like, I cannot wait to have you back on the show. Or they send you a DM 6 months after your initial interview and say, hey, I have another question about this. And our audience really loved your energy and everything that you're doing. So we would love to have you back on the show. This is what you're doing when you are promoting your guest appearances like this. What I said in the beginning is we are treating your podcast guest appearances like your own content because it is. Okay, there's another thing that we're going to talk about later about like promoting your media hits and all those things, but let's go into episode, like when the episode goes live before we get there, because I think that that's important, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. So number 3 is when your episode actually goes live, what are you supposed to do? And we talked about getting frustrated as a host of a podcast that when you're up, because the first 2 things are the above and beyond. Like these are the things that are, okay, I took a selfie, I'm already promoting it, or I'm talking it up right before the episode goes live. Like that is above and beyond the actual requirements, minimum requirements that a guest should have. But this is where people get so frustrated. They come to me and they say, Crystal, I had this fantastic interview with this fantastic guest who has a really big following, or I know that they have a huge email list, or they have a huge Facebook group, and they have yada, yada, yada. Whenever it comes to their community, they did not share it. Or I tagged them on Instagram and they didn't reshare it to their stories or whatever it is. I've heard all like across the gamut of why y'all are pissed off that no one is sharing the interviews that you've had with these guests. So think about all of those things when you are a guest in someone else's content. I don't want to hear the excuse that you are too busy to reshare your podcast guest appearances. Okay, I'm up on my pedestal now. Like I am up here, I am preaching. I am wagging my finger at y'all whenever you are just like you're frustrated because you're just like, oh, people won't promote it, but then you don't go and you don't promote other people's shows whenever you're a guest on there. So you have to do these things. You need to share it on social media. If someone tags me, if you tag me on Instagram, I'm going to reshare it. If if we have a conversation and you send me all these assets, we've talked about this. I'm going to link to a recent episode where we talked about, ways that you can really go above and beyond helping your guest share their appearances with you. I did a YouTube video where I actually walked through this simple email template that I use when an episode goes live. I say, hey, here's how you can support the show. Here's the link to the show notes. There's a very simple template that I use. And it works really well because if someone were to share that with me, I would know the expectations. The expectation for me, whenever I am like, these are the expectations I have of myself, is I'm going to share it with my audience on social. If I can, if it's not going to be very intrusive to my audience, if I'm in the middle of a promotional period, it's going to be a little bit different. But I will send an email and say, hey, this is, I was a guest on this podcast. You should go check it out. This is what their specialty is. Or You could do a video. I could just say, hey, make sure you go check out the Heather Sager show. She had me on. We talked about podcasting and content creation and having confidence whenever you're speaking. And I could link to it on Instagram because you even have the link on there. So there are so many different ways that you can do this and kind of mold it to your content and how you speak to your audience, but just share it. Y'all, this is the thing that frustrates me to no end is it is not that hard to share with your audience when you have been a guest on your show. And now I'm back at the pulpit, the pedestal, whatever you want to call it. I literally am waving my finger right now. I'm waving my finger at all of you that say, well, I don't have thousands of followers. I don't have hundreds of thousands of people on my email list or on my YouTube channel or blah, 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 blah. So why would I do it? I only have 20 people in my Facebook group. I only have 200 people on my Instagram. Why would I share it with them? This is principle, okay? We are working solely on principle right now. It does not matter. It does not matter how big your audience is. You still need to share the content that you have created with someone else. Because let me tell you, y'all, I've been doing this for a while now. The content and the audience grow over time, okay? They grow over time. And what I love is the idea that you need to serve those 10 people that are following you just as you would if there were 10,000 people following you. Let me say that again. Serve those 10 people that are following you just like they were 10,000 people. Because a lot of people will say, well, I didn't reshare it with my audience because I don't have a big enough audience. That is BS. I do not want this to be an excuse for why you are not sharing your guest appearances. Okay? This is like, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to come back down for a second. We're coming back from the harsh tones. That was a little tough love. I felt it, but it needed to be said because I hear y'all saying this all the time. I don't share it because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Share it with your audience. Share it with your audience because those hosts of those podcasts, they know. They know. They see it. I can see in my Instagram whenever you've tagged me. I see it. I can go back and see, oh my gosh, she tagged me 3 or 4 times. Who is this person? I want to go back and see who this is. I start to notice you. We interact. We engage. You eventually come onto my podcast and then I go onto your show. Then we become best buds, collaborative partners, whatever. There's so many cool opportunities that can happen if you share other people's content. So I want you to be the model guest that you want people on your show to be. You want your guests to be. So I'm going to link in the show notes to a few different resources I want you to go check out. I want you to go watch this recent YouTube video. So crystalprofit.com/episode 342 are the show notes for today. So let's just recap real fast. So number 1, when you're recording an episode, take a selfie, take a boomerang with the people that you are recording with. Number 2, before an episode goes live, talk it up, bring the hype for this guest appearance that you had on someone else's show. And number 3, when that episode goes live, share it with your audience. Please, that's all we're doing. Share the soundbite, share a graphic, share an email, whatever that looks like for you and your audience. But please share those podcast guest experiences. But that's all I have for you today. So go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 342 to check out all the resources we talked about here today. But that's all I have for you. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called fan mail shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.